It was late 2003 and I was working late one night in the office and I stumbled upon a website for the VIF, as it was known back then, which stood for Visiting International Faculty. And its role was to find teachers who could go and work in the United States. I immediately made some phone calls and filled out some paperwork, and before you know it, I'd planned to sell the business and to move to the United States to learn the ways of the American. That's the North American for my Hispanic friends. Well, the only thing I remember about orientation when I arrived in the States was that everybody had to buy a car. That was a prerequisite for working there. I had no idea that there was such bad public transport in the places where we were going to live, and also that there were no sidewalks. So really the car was the only way to get around. And it even reminds me one night of a story where we had a bar about 2 blocks from where we lived in our apartments, and we used to walk there and walk back because we didn't want to drive, obviously. And we were stopped on the way home one night by the police, who deemed our behaviour of walking suspicious, and we needed to get back to the apartments and prove to them that we weren't up to some sort of nefarious business. But I digress. I was placed in a town called Concord, which is just out of Charlotte, and it's in the south. I had no idea it was in the south. When you look at a map, it looks much closer to New York or Washington DC than it does to the south. But it turns out that these things are based much more on the Civil War than they are on directions on a map. The school I was placed at was called the School for Environmental Science, and I learned pretty quick it didn't seem to have anything to do with the environment or science. The students came from all sorts of learning disability backgrounds, mild intellectual disabilities, students on a spectrum, behavioural students, and also some gifted and talented students. And they all seem to have been dumped into this school under that euphemism. And the reason I say that is because when I arrived, there were no resources. And when I inquired about what is this School for Environmental Science, they just said, that's the way we like to teach, with hands-on working with the environment. And I said, oh, good. So what have you got to give me in the way of resources, or, you know, what should I do? And they said, well, that's up to you. I said, okay, well, is there a curriculum? No. Is there some science materials or anything at all that I can use? No, but you can order some. So I ended up having to order all the science books and all of the science materials. It seems that in the States, it's a little bit different in Australia, where we tend to have well-stocked labs and resources left for teachers who have moved in and out. Here you sort of have to, I think you sort of pick up your suitcase of materials and take it with you. But that was okay. I ended up ordering all the stuff and taking it into the school. Well, no sooner had I moved into my daily life there as a teacher and got my apartment settled, then it burned down. I literally got a phone call at school saying, your apartment's on fire, I believe, and you better get home. And so, yeah, I raced home to watch my apartment burning down, including containing all my personal effects, but, you know, passports and things like that. And that's one thing I will say, even though I was devastated at the time, having just arrived and feeling like I was just beginning to settle in, but the outpouring of the American people who supported me through those few months where I was trying to get another apartment and get on my feet. It wasn't just the Red Cross, but you know, American philanthropy is alive and well. I couldn't believe the donations from strangers and just various people in the community who were willing to not just offer support, but donate goods. You know, lounges and microwaves. They also would donate money. People I didn't even know, and certainly me from another country. It was an incredible thing, and you know, America has a deserved reputation for being that way, for being philanthropic. Well, once that was sorted out, we then, and I got back to my teaching, we had a remarkable principal, an incredible woman who came from a business background, I think, but she came in and said that I really want to do a hands-on approach to this, and I want us to cater to every individual kid's needs, and that was probably pretty essential considering that many of them had varied needs and abilities. And she settled upon what she called Edward de Bono's multiple intelligences, but I think he'd used it for business. But it was still very relevant in that it meant that every child learns in a different way. Some learn through more physical play ways, others learn through logical ways, others learn through musical ways. I won't go through all the names of the kinesthetic and all those different meanings for the different words, but it was basically catering each lesson of the day to suit different child's needs. And she went even a step further. She actually wanted to look at all our lesson plans for the week. She would spend the time to go through them all and make sure that we were covering all the bases that needed to be done to, yeah, suit the individual needs of the kids. And I thought it was great. Not everyone thought it was great, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I just thought that she had a real passion for the children there and for what they were doing. The kids were incredible at this school. I don't know why they didn't fit in so well to the mainstream American system, but it was one of the best classes I've ever taught in my life. So at the end of the year, there were the EOGs, they call them over there, a standardised testing. I wasn't aware of that until probably a few months before it was due to come up. And I said, well, not these kids, surely, because, you know, I'm not sure that they should be, they're not going to be standardised against the rest of the state, are they? And she said, oh, yes. And I said, oh, well, you know, do I practice for these tests? Oh, no, you don't practice for them. This should be covered in just the material you do during the year. I'd found out from all my friends who were teaching there that they'd been teaching this for like the second half of the year. So I was stuck with doing these EOGs. In Australia, it's usually left up to the classroom teacher to give grades. In fact, our system had just changed over to a series of aims and objectives for each year level, and you basically ticked or crossed what the students had achieved during the year. But that isn't the American way. And to make matters worse, I found out that the tests were teacher incentivized, where they were paying bonuses to teachers who got above, I don't know, 95 or 97%, I can't remember the exact amount, it was fairly high. And so you were given extra money incentives for doing this. So of course teachers were teaching to the test, as it would be. Well, anyway, my students took the test, and I got a phone call a few weeks later when the results had been tallied from my my principal, and she said to me, do you know what score your students got? I said, no. And she said, they got 100%. And I said, who got 100%? And she said, all of them got 100%. And my exact words were bullshit, which I think shocked her a little bit, but she has to learn the ways of the Australian as well. I was absolutely shocked. Those kids just blew it out of the park. So yeah, I also had a deal with this company that between each school year they would fly me home back to Australia, and that gave me another idea. How hard would it be, or is it possible that I could actually change the route so that I had stopovers in places and picked up the flight back home on a different day? And they said sure. So in this rather sneaky way, I got to visit Europe as well. So on the way home, I got to visit another teacher who had returned to Spain, and she lived in the Basque country, and I got to visit just the most beautiful part of Spain. And I also visited my nieces who were in London working at that time as well. So it was a longer route home, but I finally made it back. And my dad said to me when I'd returned home that he'd wished that he'd taken the opportunity to travel when he was younger. And if you remember from my earlier videos, my father had given me a strong lecture about not traveling until I retired. So that was one of the biggest and probably only turnaround surprises I'd had in my life, with my father saying that to me. Well, I returned to the States after the holidays. Remember, America has quite a long holiday. We had like 2 months, even longer probably, unlike Australia where it's little short periods of time in between terms. And when I got back, I found out my principal was fired. It seems that the other teachers and some of the parents and the county had agreed that she was a micromanager and needed to be replaced. I'll let you do the logical thinking on someone who's produced those results and gets fired. But anyway, she was replaced by our new principal of Nigerian descent, and I used to call him the Nigerian Prince. He didn't appeal to me at all. His main objective, self-stated, was that he was going to become the chairman of the county school board, and he would say this at every opportunity. It seemed that the school was a vehicle mostly for him to sell himself, and I just couldn't stand the guy, and didn't think that he really cared about the students at all. He took me out of the classes that I was successful in and moved me to other classes, and that was fine, but he just seemed to be extremely media savvy, and he really wanted to push his own agenda. Well, as the time was drawing to an end, I also got to visit France and Germany. I went there for the World Cup in 2006, and I did this sadly for a relationship more than for my love of soccer or football. I went there and I paid for it all on my Visa card. So
the things things we do for love. The things we do for love.
Well, on the plus side, I was asked to give a lecture at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I got to bore the audience with information about South Australia's education system, how we assessed and how we ran the curriculum, which was very different to North Carolina. But ultimately, I was having to face the fact that I was returning home, and this time when I did get back, the realization hit me that I had no job and I had no cash. I was in a city called Wollongong, which you might be familiar with, as it was where the World Indigenous Conference happened. And yeah, I was 40. My immediate problems were that I was on welfare. I had to find the cheapest accommodation I could, which was the obligatory red brick flats. My view was over the flare stack at the local steelworks. My furniture I managed to scrounge from the Salvation Army. I had no car, I had no bike, I just used trains or buses or whatever I could. And yeah, it was the lowest I think I'd been financially for a long time.
What?
I said you cannot smoke. It is the law. You must smoke outside the perimeters of the train station.
Yeah, sorry, mate. I can't understand what you're saying.
You can't understand? I speak English. I speak slow for you. No smoking allowed on the train station. See? Sign. Right there. Sign. Read right there.
So I didn't have any choice. I just picked myself up and started going around begging and pleading for work at local schools. And a few days here and there became weeks, eventually a month, and it led to some contracts being offered. And within a year and a half, I'd paid down my debts, and I had saved up enough for a deposit for a house, well, not a house, but let's just say a small unit somewhere where I lived. At that stage, there was there still is, what they called a first home buyers grant, where the government would pay half of your deposit if you could save the other half. So that's what I decided to do. Now, I'm no financial wizard, and I'm never going to give any financial advice, but I did know a few things by this age. One was that being 40, you start to think about how much longer have I got to make money, and so it did become pretty important to me to have some kind of financial backup in case my plan to live my life went awry and I had some kind of a roof over my head. And I knew that the capacity to do that was diminishing year by year. But I figured I'd last a long while, at least until 40. So that's what I did. The rules for getting the grant in Australia and for being able to have your own property were that you had to move in within 12 months. And you had to live there, I think, for 3 years after that, during that period of time. Well, I worked out that my apartment could be rented out. That would cover just about the mortgage. So with 12 months to play with, I decided I'd go to Thailand. The reason Thailand, it was kind of weird. I wanted to go this time to a country that wasn't Western and wasn't based on English or European values, spoke a different language. But the weird part was that it was in my neighbourhood. I travelled to America and to Europe and even to South America, but I hadn't been to my own backyard, which is so close to Australia. And I guess the reason I was put off is because at least here, Asia has a reputation of being a place where Australians go to party, and the last thing I wanted to do was be in a place that was full of expats.
You gonna do those helmets up?
You know, basically acting like yahoos in another country. It's a pretty naive view because, you know, Asia's huge and there are plenty of places you can go where that isn't the case. So I ended up going on an orientation to a place called Chiang Mai in the north of Thailand. And I can remember my first memory of getting to my hotel and getting out into the car park so I could have a cigarette was being told by somebody to fuck off. Continuously, this person was saying, fuck off, fuck off. And I thought, that's a bit rude. It turns out it was just the local geckos who were on the wall behind me. That's their thing. That's what they say. So it was a good welcome. But before long, before orientation had finished, well, as orientation finished, I was off to the province of Phetchaburi, which is about 2 hours south of Bangkok. And I was in a school called Benchamat. I can't pronounce the full name of it, too many consonants. But yeah, it was a great school. And I was there with a bunch of other teachers from mostly from the UK and from America. And yeah, it was a great experience. The students were so keen to learn. Their parents just valued their education so much. And we had a blast with those kids, especially the ones that specifically were looking to learn English as their major. So it was a lot of fun. I learnt to ride my first motorbike or motor scooter, whatever you want to call those hybrid things over there. And that also was a blast. I spent my evenings, as you can probably imagine, in a tropical climate like that, with going out with my colleagues and drinking. There was a nightclub section, basically a kilometre long section of open bars about 10 kilometres out of town, or from where I was living, maybe a bit less than that. But it was just open bars, outdoor areas. I think the last few months I was there, they'd actually built a nightclub. And we would go there and drink and carry on. I was with a bunch of 20-somethings, so I got to relive my misspent youth. That lasted, I think, about 3 months before I couldn't handle it anymore. And I realised why I'd given that up in my 20s, waking up with a hangover, with no more money to spare, and just talking about where you were going to go the next night. It was kind of that routine that I was so glad I was out of, if you look back on one of my videos. But it was fun. It was, it was an experience to do that again. It had kind of morphed into 4 friends, me and Eddie and Susie and Becky. 2 were from the States and 1 was from the UK and 1 Australian. And we would play Scrabble, and on one night a week we'd go out and do karaoke, we'd go out to restaurants, and that was a lot more fun for me than, the never-ending nightlife cycle. I think the biggest and the best thing about Thailand, and it's not exclusive to Thailand, but I'm not finished with my story just yet, is that it's the first time in my life that I've ever experienced that kind of freedom. We preach a lot about our freedoms in Australia and America and other Western countries, and that's the thing that makes us different. Well, I'm here to tell you there is nothing like the freedom that you get in Thailand and other parts of Southeast Asia as well. The ability to just be able to ride your bike around, and if anything goes wrong, there's someone to fix it then and there, that day. The fact that there's always meals and coffee available almost on every street corner. The fact that you can eat out 3 times a day is just a ridiculous concept in this country. Unless you're earning a 6-figure salary all the time, I think that's just out of bounds. So the ability to just live your life when the thing that's special, I think, most is that you can still get the things, if you really want to spend the money and do the time, you can get the Western things that you want, but the local food and the local culture is also inviting that you are happy just to live within that as well. So, yeah, I mean, the thing that always stuck with me, and it's a bit naughty, and of course I have to put a proviso down and say, don't do this, it's very bad, but I can remember in the town I lived in, the police would go to bed about 10. All the residents were off the street by probably 11 at the latest. And the traffic lights would all change from red and green and yellow to just flashing yellow. So the streets were pretty deserted, and I would come home at night either with my friend or I'd go by myself home, and there was no helmet was needed. I wasn't wearing a helmet. I was a little bit tipsy, and yeah, it was just a buzz. It was an absolute buzz. I've never felt, I wouldn't imagine doing that at home, and I don't recommend you do it, as I've said before. But that's, it kind of summed up the freedom feeling that I got. Yeah, sure, you take risks. That's why we have laws, and I'm not going to go into a lecture about the bureaucracy of living in a country like ours, but yeah, that was just an amazing feeling. We also, before I left, I managed to squeeze in a trip to Indonesia with Eddie, one of the teachers that I mentioned, and convince him that, it would be a great idea if we climbed some volcanoes. So I did a little bit more of that, and I managed to get to Krakatoa, Anak Krakatoa, in Sunda Strait, and that, as you know, I don't have to explain to you, it's a world famous volcano, but I made it onto that island, and we were there a couple of years before it blew up, and there was a forest there, and it's just amazing to think that everything that was there when we were there is now gone. And where else did we go? We went to Bromo as well, and then we climbed Mount Semeru, which is the tallest mountain on the island of Java. So that was a cool trip. Yeah, so it was an amazing time. So I've got one more video to make. I tried to make them one per decade, but I failed at that miserably, sorry. Some things there's just too much to do and pack into a watchable time. But there, one more video to go, out here at least, and then it's time to start talking about what examples you can take from the things that I've actually lived my life doing, and I hope you'll find it useful. Until then, of course, as always, have fun.